Welcome back, everyone. Mohammad, you're up. Take it away.
Hi, can you hear me? All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Symposium on AI and Knowledge Work. I'm Mohammad Jarrahi. I'm an associate professor here at SILS, School of Information and Library Science at UNC Chapel Hill. I have the honor of moderating the second panel on how work practices are transformed through the use of AI and other advanced information technology in the digital age. There are quite a number of interesting panelists today, so hopefully we'll go with that order. I'm not sure if Tracy is here. If you are here, let me know. So the first panelist is Dr. Tracy McMillan-Cottom. She's a SILS Associate Professor. Her research provides critical analysis of technology, higher education, class, race, and gender. The next panelist is Dr. Shamsi Iqbal. She is a principal researcher at Microsoft Research. Her work focuses on developing computational mechanism for attention management, productivity, and safety management in multitasking domains. Recently, she's done some really interesting work on the integration of artificial intelligence in these domains. The next panelist is Dr. Andrew Fiore. He was a former head of data at Asana, and his work, Andrew, combines data science, survey science, UX research, market research, and social science perspectives to drive products and business decision-making. And the last panelist is Dr. Daniel Green, visiting us from University of Maryland. He's an assistant professor at the iSchool. His research focuses on the technologies and institutions that teach us how, why, and where to work in the information economy. So we've got an interesting combination of people who build artificial intelligence system and those who study the social organizational impacts of these technologies. I think Tracy is here, so if you can, if you're up next, let me know if you have any problem.
I'm sorry, am I up next? Could someone else go first and just give me a couple moments? I'm having some technical issues. Thank you.
Sure. Shamsi, are you able to go next?
Yeah, sure. I'll be happy to start off. And thanks, Mohammed. Really excited to be here in the sense that, well, from my study in Seattle, Washington. And so one of the things that I wanted to first talk about is the fact that this pandemic or this forced remote work has brought us all together in a quite unexpected way. I mean, I have been giving talks, a number of talks in the past year and a half, which I would have never thought about being possible in a regular year with travel and everything. I think that it's just remarkable that we have the technology to support us to do this and kind of like be in the same space virtually and share our thoughts. So thanks for inviting me to the symposium. And I'm going to start talking a little about the work that we have been doing in the past year and a half or so, but that also builds on years of research that we have been doing in the space of thinking about new ways of working. And that was well before the pandemic, but it had come back to make us think in a new fashion about, well, what does the future of work mean? Where people are working in attentionally constrained environments, people are working in different ways, they're working from anywhere, any place, or at least that's what they aspire to do. And they want to be able to bring in their own flexibility needs, their well-being needs, their personal needs, and all of them should come to bear with how they work in the workplace or in a work setting. So I don't have slides, so I'm going to make this somewhat conversational. So the way that I think of it is that what is the immediate next problem that we're thinking about, and how can AI and other technology support help us with that? But also, how can we make sure that the human part is not sacrificed? And so what I'm thinking about right now is that, well, how can we build equitable futures or equitable experiences for all in a hybrid future? And what does it mean? So basically, work is multifaceted. People's experiences are also multifaceted. We we know that different people, when they come to work in the workplace, so they have more or less, it's a normalized experience. So everyone is working kind of like 8 hours. They're in a similar kind of technology setup. Resources are similar for people in same roles. But as people are working from home or from different locations, that equitable experience is no longer there. And we know that in the pandemic, I mean, different people indeed have had different types of experiences. Putting aside the health issues and the challenges there, even thinking about how information workers, knowledge workers have been able to, or have had to deal with different types of experiences in terms of the resources that are available for them to do work, the ability for them to find time to do focused work, the caregiving responsibilities that some might have, the social isolations that some others might be facing. In fact, we did some research early in the pandemic, and we found that people, especially females with caregiving responsibilities, but males as well, they were finding it difficult to focus. About 85% of the females reported that they were finding it difficult to focus, females with caregiving responsibilities. And this is when the schools were all closed, kids were at home. Similarly, 70% of the males who had caregiving responsibilities, they said that they were having difficulties in finding time to focus. There were about, I'm looking at my notes because I tend to forget the numbers. I think about 60% across the board, people said that they were feeling socially isolated because everyone was at home. So there is this needed challenge around how we can bring in these social connections when we are all working from home. People were stressed. More females are reporting that they felt stressed as they were working from home. People were exercising less, especially females, eating less healthy. So there was this remarkable impact on parts of the population who, putting aside the economic disparities, and these were people who were kind of like in the upper SES, that they were finding it challenging to get their work done. So now that we have kind of like gone through this in a year and a half into the pandemic, things have normalized somewhat, or people have found ways to do their work. But it does bring us to the point of the way that we used to do work in the past, where we thought that, well, we will have big chunks of time available and we can do focused work. That seems to be challenged. And this brought us back to a concept that we have been thinking about or working on pretty deeply in the past few years, is the concept of microproductivity. And the notion of microproductivity is basically, you take a big task and you decompose it into smaller tasks. Now, we do that naturally for many things. When we have a big challenging things, it is easier for us to think of it in steps. And we do the steps sequentially or parallelly or out of order in whatever way it suits us. But we wanted to formalize this a bit more and think more strategically about, okay, let's take a complex task as writing and let's start breaking it down into smaller pieces, because once we have the smaller pieces, we can now think about fitting them into the fragmented moments that exist during people's lives. And the motivation back then, this is work that Jamie Teven and I led, was that people's days are fragmented. They have like these micro moments that are scattered throughout the day. You imagine that, well, you're waiting for a meeting to start. There are 5 minutes before the meeting. You can't do anything substantial in those 5 minutes, but you can check email. Maybe we play games on our phones. We just have chit chat. So there are these ways that you could also think about some of these smaller moments where you really would like to get something done. You could get a small task done. And once you start defragging them at the end of the day, you figure out that you have actually done something quite substantial without having to set aside that time. Now, this became really important during the pandemic, where many people were finding it really difficult to find chunks of time where they could sit down and focus. And so we brought back this research around microproductivity and saying that, well, can you take your complex tasks, break them into smaller pieces, and so that when you have to interleave something in, you can still make progress without having to worry about, I have to work late hours to make up for this. So I'll talk about our journey a little because it was quite interesting. And this was back in, I would say, 2014, where we started thinking about, well, I mean, can we look at something as complex as writing? Because writing isn't something that you think of doing in micro moments, and then start writing this say long essay or long paper using entirely micro moments. And so the motivation is that if we do that, maybe at the end of the day we can save an hour, and so instead of a 40-hour week we end up having like 35-hour weeks. So that was the moonshot or the broader vision. But once we started thinking about that, we faced like different issues. Obviously, writing at the beginning, it is something that requires some focused thought. You need to create the outlines. You need to then start expanding on them. But that's not how everyone works. So we wanted to find these generalized patterns around writing and how we can break it down. So we talked to a bunch of writers and tried to understand how they work and whether or not some of these things we could actually take the burden of them. So for example, one thing that came out of that conversation is that the writers didn't necessarily want any kind of system, any tool, any support in where they were brainstorming or they were coming up with their own ideas, but they really wanted support with formatting. They really wanted support with kind of like organizing the document. And this kind of like brought up this opportunity is that, well, if we break down a task and then we can start realizing that there are certain parts that are specific for the user and it needs their own expertise, but there are other parts that, well, they don't. So you can imagine a copy editor coming in and helping with some of the editing pieces, but you could also imagine that a well-trained AI could do some of those things. And so we had this notion of this kind of like shoemaker model, is that you work on your text, you put together the thoughts, and then AI comes in, or maybe crowd workers come in and help kind of like organize or clean it up. And when you wake up in the morning, it's ready for you. So we did a bunch of research around this piece. And so what we did is that we looked at how we could automatically identify microtasks in a person's writing and then have them do these microtasks as a person, as self in a kind of attentionally divided situation. So you could imagine that a person is commuting on a bus, they could do email, or they could kind of knock off some of these microtasks without having to actually go into the document. What we found is that people were able to actually not only do the microtasks because they were designed in such a way that they didn't need the whole context of the document, and because the user is the owner of the document, they already have the context. But it also helped them be more, I would say, they were more connected to the document in the sense that the content was more fresh in their mind. And so when they came back to the document itself in a proper machine, it was easier for them to ramp up. So in some sense, the microtasks helped them to also quickly engage with the document, where if they were coming back to the document after a while, it would be more difficult. We also identified workflows that could help with systems to automatically kind of like fragment a document into multiple pieces, and then identify the pieces that the system could help with. But we didn't want to just be constrained to documents. We also thought about programming tasks, where a lot of programmers want to do things when they're mobile, or at least check statuses for their coding stuff, but they didn't because they didn't really have any capabilities to do these things on mobile. So we provided some options for people that they could take their parts of their programming task on their mobile so that they could keep tabs, run quick unit tests, or look for references, and that would be automatically integrated back into their programming environment. So the reason why I bring this up is that these kinds of microtasks are quite suitable for situations where you are on the go, you are really trying to interleave something quickly. A great example is in the past year when my kids were learning from home, I would have to go and sit with them, and I didn't want to take my entire laptop or my workstation in their environment. So I would take my mobile phone and try to get through some of these small tasks. But it would have been really nice if there was a list of things in a very organized fashion that would show up, and so that I would feel that I am being productive and making progress. So those are some of the things that we're actually looking at right now. But I do want to bring this back to kind of like the original idea of what does equitable mean? Equitable means that, well, the parent who's working from home amidst other types of distractions, how can we make sure that they are able to make progress on the work similar to the person who's in the workplace with their ability to focus on longer times? How can we make sure that the person who's working from home is socially connected and has equal access to the resources similar to the people who are in the office? Because that's the only way that we will be able to create this equitable future and a hybrid work space where people have the flexibility that they need, their well-being needs are taken care of, their work-life balance is addressed, and a slew of other things that will come up as we move into the workplace again. So I will leave the floor at that. I mean, I had tons of other things to say, but I would love to hear from the other panelists.
Thank you so much, Shamsi. Quite an interesting research, and thanks for sharing your insight. Andrew,